This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing, so just jump and do that if you're looking for...
A little over a year ago, I made a video which got me in a little bit of trouble, where I kind of asked a question and made a bunch of assumptions around a fuzz pedal that when I opened it up, it kind of was a little bit surprising to me, like what was in there, and I assumed that, you know, there was quite a lot of stuff in there that might be cheaper than later Josh revealed that it would be. Now, obviously, that was revealing in terms of A, how much I don't know about stuff, and B, how much I don't know about stuff. But yeah, it was only meant as like a little bit of a silly thing at the time. But it has become a bit of a thing where, you know, I'd like to think about like the cost of some of this stuff. And this is one of the things that I'm seeing around the Helix Stadium, is that people are really kind of surprised at the price. And so I'm asking, like, is the Helix Stadium XL too expensive? Question mark. So, I went for a coffee yesterday with Anthony from up the road, and Anthony was paying this time, and we got a medium latte bullshit thing each, and it was £5.70 each. Now, the Helix Stadium costs £1,980, which, if you do the math, is about 347 Starbucks coffees. Now, I'm not saying a Starbucks coffee is a good investment or not overly priced either, but it does put it into a little bit of perspective. Maybe, like, you know, how many Starbucks coffees would it take over the year to pay for your Helix Stadium? The other kind of thought that I think makes sense to think about, if you're a gigging musician, which I'm guessing some of you are, if you're interested in the Helix Stadium XL, is like, how many of your gigs would it take to pay for it? Now, if my fees in 2025 are on average maybe like £200, then 20 gigs would pay for it twice. 10 gigs, right? And I think when you put it in some of these terms, maybe it doesn't seem as incredulous or expensive. I think that the trouble that we're up against really is that we are basing some of our perception on this stuff about what the Helix cost in 2015, what some of the competition costs in 2025, and also just kind of, for me personally, my kind of idea of what prices should be kind of tracks back sort of 5 or 10 years ago. It's definitely something I've had to come to terms with over time. Now, going back to like what is involved in some of these pieces of gear. So we can look at like a Helix Stadium, the pictures, right? We've got scribble strips. Was it 8 or 10 of them? There's foot switches. Again, 8 or 10 of them, or 13 or something like that. We got a touch screen. When I was doing that video and like looking at the response from Josh Scott about what it actually costs, the enclosures of the effects pedal were like a huge part of the cost of the actual thing. So if you imagine like all of these things that we're told like an effects pedal that end up with it costing around sort of £200, can I see that a Helix Stadium would easily, in terms of components, cost 10 times your bog standard Overdrive? Absolutely. So the other day I did a video with what was it, the Warm Audio Throne of Tone, which I think is about £200. Would the Helix Stadium XL be 10 times more expensive to produce than one of them? I'd say absolutely yes. And let me know in the comments if you think actually I think you're way off on that. I think that's got to be true, right? That there's a bunch of other gear that probably, you know, relatively is kind of easy to produce in comparison to a flagship modeler. Coming to this point of flagships, I think this is one important thing to note, that like Line 6 have kind of done this to themselves, and I'm hoping that it's beneficial for them. But the flagship is the flagship. But Line 6 are pretty good about bringing the learnings from the flagship over the time and the course of the flagship's lifespan, product cycle, whatever you want to call it, to other way cheaper devices. So, for instance, when I look on like Line 6 Helix Stadium, another thing that comes up, which I think is insanely competitive, is the Line 6 Helix LT, which you can get now for £749 in the UK. Now, if I'm honestly looking at it, yes, it's a product which is like coming close to its end of support. You know, is it going to be the same sort of thing? In 10 years' time, will the Helix LT have got way better? I'm guessing absolutely not. It might have got a few, this is what Eric Klein has said, like a few extra effects and, you know, things that they can bring over from the Stadium, they might. But largely it seems like the Helix, if you buy it in 2025, is largely going to remain about what it is. Whereas the Helix Stadium is going to, you hope, continue on and on and on, getting upgrades. Now, this is another key thing that I would say once I get to this point. But, for instance, like the HX Stomp 2018, £400. The Pod Go, I think about £400-ish. There are these other options from Line 6 that I think are incredibly competitive, less than half the price of the flagship. So if you're wondering, you know, is the Helix Stadium too expensive, then Line 6 have kind of thought about this as well in the past, and that's why they bring up things that are not the flagship. So I don't think Line 6 or anyone would be necessarily angry at me for saying, if it is too expensive for you, wait. And in time, you know, something else will probably, I'd imagine, come from Line 6. If past is prologue, as they say, then we can expect that, right? And for me, in 2015, the Helix was too expensive. I bought a Kemper, I think, for about £900 around that sort of time, 2014. And I was like, I'm not going to spend £1,500 on Line 6 Helix. When the HX Stomp came out, I was actually way more interested, and I think actually I can afford to take a punt on that and see what this Line 6 thing is all about. Now, as I said just a second ago, the Helix Stadium in 2025 is actually kind of parallel to what the Helix was in 2015, in that 2015 Helix had potential, but when it came out, you know, there was a relatively similar amount of amp models. The Helix Stadium has a bit of an advantage in that it builds on the Helix sort of library, so you get all of the improvements that have happened from 2015 to 2025. But beyond 2025, I think you could hope that the Helix Stadium is going to flourish beyond. So like the Line 6 Helix in 2015 was not necessarily anywhere close to the Line 6 Helix in 2025. It's kind of not quite exponentially grown, but there has been really significant improvements, like certainly double the amount of amps. Beyond that, new stock cabs, boatloads of effects, like a lot of improvements and meaningful ones. I've done other videos on that you could check out, but that is kind of the thing I would say that in 2015, people buying a Helix then, I think, were taking a bit of a punt in a way that stadium owners would be now if you're waiting for a pre-order or whatever you're doing. That is kind of the thing. And again, I would say to you, like, if you're thinking, like, I'm going to be gigging this thing, or I'm a daily user of this thing, then if you imagine that you might hold on to that piece of gear for 5 years, for example, and you're using it every day, I think that is really how you can evaluate the cost of that item, and potentially then you can work out, you know, was it worth it or was it not? And I'd be surprised, to be honest with you, if some of those early adopters of the Line 6 Helix from like 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 didn't feel like they'd actually got their money's worth, because you're going to get maybe 8-10 years of updates that you don't have to pay for, presumably. This is if past is prologue, if that sort of thing carries on. And I think that has made it worth it for those people that bought a Helix early on. Let's just jump in and have a look at some other products that are out there at the moment and kind of evaluate the Helix Stadium cost versus those. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If it's too expensive for you as well, I think that's totally fine to say. You know, we're talking about a sum of money, like it's nearly 2 times my mortgage payments. This is not a small amount of money, so I think it's fair to ask, you know, what is this thing doing? Is this too expensive? Can I afford it? Etc. So here, if I look at Line 6 Helix LT, that to me is like a bit of a standout, right? Where it's like, oh, that comes up at $749. The Helix Floor, $1,059. So that's a very, I think, competitive price. Now, the other kind of thing to think about, I think, first of all, you've got things like the Quad Cortex, which I think at $1,449 is going to be, again, quite a competitive thing. I want to do another video on this at some other point, but like, is it worth buying some of these cheaper effects? And I think the answer for some people is definitely yes. Although, again, it seems to me like a little bit of a while. You don't necessarily know exactly what you're getting. Now, here, $549 for the HX Stomp. Again, for a lot of folks, if you were playing at home, that might be absolutely perfect. $749 for the gigging musician, for the Helix LT. Again, hard to compete with. $1399 for the Tone Master Pro. Now, this is one of the most recent modelers, and you know, touchscreen. It's got some really interesting things going for it. It won't have any capture or stuff like that at the moment. I don't know if there's any plans for it to have that, but again, neither does the Stadium XL right now. But the Tone Master Pro, I think for me, felt like the end of the kind of next generation modelers, so like whether it was Axfex 3, Line 6 Helix, Quad Cortex, and I felt like we're now maybe in 2025 going beyond that to a new era. But probably this hardware is going to be capable enough, and maybe the Quad Cortex as well, that, you know, the thing slowing these companies down is not necessarily the hardware, more the manpower. Nano Cortex 449, again, quite a lot for your money there. The Pod Go 399, the Profile Player 649. Here, this is quite interesting, like the Headrush Core 619. So there's plenty of other options, really, is I guess the takeaway. What would an FM9 cost you? $1949. And so that's going to be less than the Helix Stadium XL. Now we do know that Fractal are working on a successor. This should probably be in another video as well. To something. I don't know whether it's going to be the Axefx or whatever, but Cliff has specifically talked about a touchscreen device coming soon, which is going to make everything else look like a Game Boy. So, 1949. I guess now let's also just look at what it might cost you for a drive pedal, like £109 for a tube screamer. Do I believe that a Helix Stadium has sort of 20 times the amount of components and cost involved in making it as that? Absolutely, I'll buy that. Here, we're at a brown amplification ethane. So, do I believe, what was that? 7 times that? Less than? 6? Do I believe that that's true? Absolutely. So, I think there's plenty of other bits and pieces out there that are attracting high prices relative to what might be involved in production. Brown amplification, the protein, it's not, I think, beyond the pale. Here's a pedal I liked, 8 of them, 7 of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is possible to justify it. I think, particularly when you think about actually how much work has gone into the stadium thus far and how much is still needed. All of those images that go on into the focus view, something to think about that every focus view as well has 5 sort of presets behind it to make that happen. It's not to be sniffed at. So is it expensive? Yes. Is it too expensive? For a huge chunk of folks that I think are interested in this sort of thing, absolutely. Are you going to be left in the dark? Going forward, I would imagine that we're going to see this sort of equivalent. Like 3 years after the Helix came the HX Stomp. Do you know what I mean? The HX1, if you're into effects, £219. The Pod Go came a little later on as well. You'll have your opportunity. The Flagship isn't for everyone. Is it too expensive for you? Possibly. But, when you look at how much is actually involved in a piece of gear like this, I think you can see that this cannot be cheap to manufacture. I think. Similar to this sort of stuff. Scribble strips, switches, buttons, everything. Like, it's not cheap to make these, and they're not made at a scale like a television or a laptop or an iPhone or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.